This project basically covers 300 years of Black history in New London. It covers things that people would never in their wildest have any idea about. Persons like Ichabod Pease. Here's a man in his 80s starts a school. A person who was one of my mentors, Linwood Bland, worked electric boat, was more than instrumental in getting people jobs and changing the whole racial scene for this part of Connecticut as we are standing here today. But the 15 sites that we do have are just the beginning. This is history, American history. And the easiest thing to do right now, once we've got this momentum, is to continue. Because we hope that in the next few years that we can hand the torch off, and that if we look back, instead of 15 sites, there are 50. If you want to find out about who we are as Americans, you come to a city like New London, you go to these different sites, you can see the important role that everybody played in the making of this country. A group of Africans off the coast of Cuba were being transported to a plantation who took control of a ship. That ship was actually holding 53 enslaved Africans who had been removed from their home. And they tried to return home after taking control of the ship, killing the captain, killing the cook, and keeping the two plantation owners as captives, hoping they could sell them home. They ended up off the shores of Connecticut. And they were brought to New London. There's a plaque here at the Amistad Pier documenting their history. The main reason that people should come to visit is for the pleasure, the enjoyment, and the gaining of knowledge of an American story. Because this is part of American history. This is turning a page in a big, thick book that a lot of people never get a chance to read the chapter or turn the pages. Yet when you come here and you actually walk this Black Heritage Trail, you find out that we did participate, that we all participated. And as a result, we all gained by it.
New London's Black Heritage Trail is made up of 15 sites about New London's Black history, and it spans over 300 years of Black resilience and achievement. Each spot has a plaque that explains the history. It does bring these stories alive. It makes visible stories that have been all around us, but that people were unaware of. The earliest site on the New London Black Heritage Trail is where Robert Jacklin in 716 bought property against the vehement objections of the city leaders. The most contemporary site is the longtime home of Spencer Lancaster, who is alive today and in his 90s. But in 1960, he became New London's first Black elected official. We have sites that ought to be nationally known. Sadie Dillon Harrison wrote a precursor to the Green Book. The Green Book is worldwide famous. Her book predated the Green Book by 7 years, and it covers much of the same material. And she wrote it here and co-wrote it here in New London. The Green Book was a compilation of sites in over 300 cities where Black travelers could find safe and welcoming accommodations. Or at least that's what her version was. Victor Green's Negro Motorist Green Book was a compilation of sites where Black travelers could find safe and welcoming accommodations, or places where they could just get gas or get their hair cut, where they could be served and know that they weren't going to be in any danger. Sadie Dillon Harrison compiled something very similar here in New London. Her house and the place where she wrote that book should be nationally known. She should be a nationally known figure. I think Ichabod Pease should be a nationally known figure. To be born into enslavement in 1755 and then to go from that beginning to opening a school for New London's Black children when he's 81 years old, that's an incredible story. That story would inspire anybody. Other sites might not be of national significance, but they are a way to enter into national stories. So a lot of the sites on New London's Black Heritage Trail deal with the Great Migration and how people fended for themselves, built their own institutions when they were banned from existing institutions, benevolent societies, fraternal organizations. One of the sites leads into a national story about a wave of racial violence that erupted in 1919. Here in New London, we had a race riot that doesn't seem possible that we would have had something like that. For me, it was jaw-dropping that we had a race riot in New London in 1919. But there were 25, at least, that sprang up in the United States during that summer that became known as the Red Summer. Another site has to do with the long struggle for educational equality in the United States. Sarah Harris Fairweather lived in New London, and she, as a young black woman, wrote to Prudence Crandall to say, "Would you let me into your all-white school?" And that led to the integration of Prudence Crandall's school in Coventry, Connecticut. It is one of the most satisfying things I've ever worked on in my life, in part because of the researchers that I got to work with, but I think it was inspiring to me for the same reason that I think it will inspire tourists and school children. These stories are about the human spirit and rising up through adversity. And it was an honor to be part of making this visible and making this come to life for people. The Black Heritage Trail, of course, is going to be important to people who are black, who are residents of New London, or who are coming here to visit New London. But I want to emphasize that this is not just a trail for black viewers. This is a trail that is going to be inspirational to anybody of any race. It's just story after story after story about human resilience.
The Black Heritage Trail is a culmination of over 300 years of black excellence, black history, and stories of resilience from our black heroes and leaders of yesterday and today. The sites are sprinkled all throughout New London. Right now we're on the infamous Hempstead House grounds. We're in the black neighborhood of New London, or what used to be the black neighborhood of New London, where there's about 4 or 5 markers that are here telling those different stories. We have a cluster of markers down on our historic waterfront pier, and then we'll have more planned that are coming throughout the city. Ichabod Pease was 81 years old. After freeing himself twice, he started the first black school for black children here in the city of New London. The idea of the trail is not just to honor heroes that have passed, but to honor today's heroes, to keep that conversation going. I'm usually overjoyed. I get kind of speechless, to be honest. I get a little teary-eyed. One, just knowing the harsh story that I come from, my family comes from, in terms of just really trying to make it as black Americans in today's America. So just knowing that I had the ability with my beautiful team to be able to honor these historic figures from our past, to show my grandparents, my parents, my nieces, my nephews, and all the future generations that not only is our story relevant, but it's intertwined with America and the world's history. And we come from some of the best and greatest black leaders and black inventors in the world. So to be able to share that story and for people to come and be overwhelmed, fascinated, intrigued, and to want more, it's just truly empowering. Black history is no different than history in general, except it's history that's often not told or not told authentically. This trail is for everyone. Anyone that wants to understand history beyond the context of today's unfortunate textbooks, if people want to understand authentic history, how that history intertwines with their great-grandparents and their grandparents, or just to learn stories of their fellow neighbors, of the fellow youth that they're going to have to interact with, not only is it vital and it's important, it's inspiring and it's encouraging, and it's just really incredible history. History is so incredible when we're not subjective and we're just more objective about it, where the point is to learn and to grow from. So when you really go with that lens and that filter of, I just want to learn, I want to grow, it leads to acceptance, it leads to not only this amazing historic trail, but it leads to funding initiatives, changes, representation in politics, city government and leaders. There's just so much that can come with the power of conversation, and this just sparks that conversation. And I just think it's a beautiful thing. It's also a testament to community, strong community. I mean, at the center of this, you have a black former city councilor who sparked this idea, but you also have my white counterparts, you have nonprofits, you have city government that's completely involved with the director Felix Reyes of ODP and our mayor and our city council. So it's a complete community project, and I think that's what gives so much depth and so much meaning to this project. We're used to learning about big figures in history and time, which is your Martin Luther Kings and your Frederick Douglasses, who gave a speech here right next to the Day newspaper, which is located here in New London. You have pastors that started some of the most amazing and profound churches that were also part of, the March in Selma. So these stories that are local intertwine all throughout history. The Amistad Historic Pier is incredible. One of the first slave ships came here, the Speedwell, which only documented coming to to New London and Middletown, Connecticut. So we're talking 28 slaves, I think it's roughly 28 slaves. We have their actual names that we can actually give them their flowers, if you will, and be able to share that excitement and that history. We're talking over 300 years of history. Like, how much more profound can it get? As a black leader and a former black elected official, is that our project can exist anywhere. It's something that other communities should embrace. Whether they take on a 15 marker trail or just one marker, the idea is you cannot not tell untold stories. For me, growing up in public school systems and not being told about an Ichabod Pease or this amazing foundation that's here is, for me, it almost feels a little bit criminal. It feels like I went without something that I was owed to me. So to be able to replace that for future generations and future youth, I just want to encourage other communities, other leaders to make sure that they take pride in telling authentic stories, because it really just enriches the world, but it enriches our youth who are going to go on to change our communities and change our world forever.
73 Hempstead Street is something that it's arguably the most significant house in terms of telling the story of the black community history in New London. It was built by the abolitionist Civilian Haley in the 1840s, who put his money where his mouth is, and at a time when people were reluctant to sell houses to blacks, he built 5 houses and sold them at cost to blacks. It became the core of the first black neighborhood in New London. The first purchaser, by the way, Civilian Haley was involved in the Amistad. He was one of the key people in the Amistad case in court. He was involved with the Hempstead abolitionists and the Harris sisters here in New London, part of that movement. So those houses, 73 Hempstead Street was one of the first ones. It was purchased by a guy named John Parkus and his wife, Lavinia Ruggles Parkus. Lavinia Ruggles is the sister of the famous abolitionist and freedom fighter David Ruggles, who was born in Lyme, grew up in Norwich, and founded the Committee of Vigilance in New York, and was responsible for freeing probably 600, helping 600 people get to freedom in New York. The network that he set up became the foundation of what later became known as the Underground Railroad. But that all started, and New London has a connection to that. That house remained in the Parkus family for about 80 years, and then it was purchased by a woman named Sadie Dillon Harrison, who was the head of the United Negro Welfare Council. She helped found a bank here in New London with her brother, and she wrote a book called the Hackley and Harrison Guide, the Hackley and Harrison Hotel and Apartment Guide for Colored Travelers, which was the only precursor of what we know as the Green Book. You've heard of the Green Book, which lasted for 30 years. Well, there was a precursor of it, and it was published by Sadie Dillon Harrison right up there on Hempstead Street in 1930, 7 years before Victor Hugo Green published the Green Book. And every single item that's in Sadie Dillon Harrison's book is in the Green Book. Sadie Dillon Harrison is an unsung hero who did a lot of the heavy lifting for the Green Book, and no one in New London knew anything about that. So we have her memorialized. And not only that, that house was a Green Book site. W.E.B. Du Bois stayed there, and it was also the childhood home of 2 of New London's civil rights leaders in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, named Linwood Bland, who also has a site on the trail, and Sarah Cheney, who helped break the color line at the local banks. So the history of that house encompasses the story of the black community for from 1840 until today. Linwood Bland died just a few years ago. So that's a continuous history of almost 200 years. The earliest plaque that we have is the story of Robert Jacklin, which is, he had a former slave. He purchased his freedom, came to New London, and started a family here. And he tried to buy land in New London. And the townspeople were opposed to it. And in fact, the seller of the property was issued a warning that is entered in the property records in City Hall, warning him not to sell his property to this black man, Robert. It doesn't say to whom, but it was to Robert Jacklin. I grew up in New London, and our history was focused on Nathan Hale, Benedict Arnold, the West Indies trade, and the whaling industry. What we found in researching these stories is that there are a lot of other heroes that we haven't talked about. There are a lot of heroes, pioneers, and role models that our children need to know about, that have not been told. It's the half that's never been told. So it's important that we share these stories, because the history of of the black community in New London is more than just slavery. It's much more than that. Many of the folks that we are connecting here are connected themselves in ways that we didn't know about. So these are stories we need to hear about. And our children deserve to hear this and not just have a partial history. This is a more complex and a more accurate telling of the story.
So we are here in front of the Hempstead House, Joshua Hempstead's home. The property itself and the fact that they were here dates back to about 1644. However, this house was built the year of the diarist's birth, and we could differentiate Joshua the sheriff, or Joshua his father, and then Joshua the diarist. Our diarist is the guy who kept the diary for a period of 47 years, which is how we find out about our Adam Jackson. But people were married in this home, courts were held in this home, all kinds of things. And then we have the addition also that was built on in the 1728, so about 50 years later. So we're kind of spanning a couple decades here. So Adam Jackson was a man who was enslaved here at the Hempstead houses. Adam Jackson was born in chattel slavery about 1700, and he was initially living with the Rogers family. His mother and father, John and Joan Jackson, actually have a pretty storied history that starts a little bit before that time. John Jackson actually was enslaved in the West Indies and brought to this area, given to John Jackson. About 1687, he's brought to these colonies. By 1700, he is free. And then around 1710, he marries Joan Jackson, Adam's mother. Together, they have two children, Adam and Miriam. And then those two children actually end up being enslaved to the Fox family along with Joan at some point. And so John Jackson's family story is pretty fascinating. He ends up not only having his wife and children stolen away from him, but he actually brings them back, gets them from slavery. Out on the Fisher's Island, there's this huge family story, huge saga about why Joan and John have been separated, are their kids free or enslaved, but Adam and Miriam had been left on that Fox family farm, and so they were left in slavery. When Adam is about 20-something years old, he comes here to, after Samuel Fox passes away, Adam Jackson is brought to this property while Joshua Hempstead goes to the Foxes to settle his estate. Joshua actually acquires Adam as his enslaved person. So Adam Jackson comes to live at the Hempstead houses for a period of about 30 years. So Joshua Hempstead passes away in 1758. And then Adam Jackson ends up showing up as a free man on the tax rolls about 1764, but unfortunately that's the last time we see or hear from Adam Jackson. Well, this is the starting point for the Black Heritage Trail, at least that's how we so call it. Obviously the property is here, and through Connecticut Landmarks we give tours often, May through October, and so it is like the cultural center, I think, of the neighborhood, and it's easy to pinpoint because it spans, how the colonies get their start, slavery to freedom, and the rest of the Black Heritage Trail. We have 73 Hempstead up the street, we have the Fairweathers, we have the Ancientest Burial Ground where the Black governors are talked about. So it just spans all of that time, and I think that I consider this to be like the community green. People can come here. We have festivals. We have the Juneteenth festival, which will be June 9th, 10th, and 11th this year. And so what we do with that is we have people come out and they get to learn about the Hempsteads. They get to learn about Adam Jackson. And for the rest of the trail, we can learn about that too. And people walk these streets every day. I think that's the most fascinating part, is even if you're not aware of the trail, even if you're not aware of what's going on, that's something that, especially if you're from New London, will catch your eye when you're walking up and down the street. That plaque used to not be there. That one used to not be over here. What does that thing say? And then you get almost reignited, and there's more to go. I think Curtis told you a little bit more about the phase 2 and what's coming from that. I hope they understand that these fascinating things, and I mean from slavery to freedom, the resilience, the struggle, the strife, all of the things that we've been through as African Americans and as a nation, because this affects all of us. I hope really that people know that they can take away with them the pride that, yes, we started over here, but here's where we're going and there's more to do. I think that people should be able to take away a piece of their story. My really number one hope is that people grab a little bit of something anywhere they go and become reignited and say, well, what else didn't we know? Because there are so many stories, and unfortunately in our lifetime, we're not going to have time to tell them all. But I really do hope that this ignites people's interest and piques their curiosity, and I hope they all grab something and just run with it.